I'd been looking forward to this trip since January. That's not an exaggeration. I had it marked on my phone calendar with a little tent emoji, which is embarrassing. But that's where I was mentally. Work had been grinding me down since the fall. The kind of slow grind where nothing goes catastrophically wrong. It just never stops. Tucker had floated the idea over text sometime around Christmas. 3 days, a cabin outside Pisgah, no plans, just trails and beer and catching up. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We left Asheville around noon on Friday. Tucker drove because it was his rental, a silver Toyota Camry that smelled like someone had tried to cover up cigarette smoke with a vanilla air freshener. Didn't quite work. Leah was in the passenger seat with her feet up on the dash and her headphones around her neck. Not wearing them, just kind of holding them there. I was in the back with 2 duffel bags and a paper bag of snacks I'd grabbed from the Ingalls on Merriman before we left. The drive out was maybe 45 minutes. We got off the highway near Brevard and took a county road up into the hills, and the trees came in close on both sides pretty fast. Not dramatic about it. Just there. Tucker had the address pulled up on his phone. The cabin was listed on one of those rental sites, the kind with the professional photos where everything looks slightly better than it actually is. I'd looked at it maybe 6 times. I'm not great at waiting for things. We found it on a gravel road off Route 276, down a short drive through a stand of hemlocks. The cabin itself was smaller than the photos suggested, which I'd expected. Wood siding, a metal roof, a covered porch with 2 Adirondack chairs and a wooden bench someone had pushed against the railing. There was a rusted thermometer nailed next to the door. It read 62 degrees. That seemed about right. "This is great," Tucker said. He said it the way he says most things, like it's already decided and he's just confirming it out loud. Leah got out and stretched and looked at the tree line for a second, before she looked at the cabin. I noticed that, but didn't say anything. I figured she was just taking it in. The inside smelled like cedar and a little bit like dust. There was a kitchen with a 2-burner stove, a living area with a plaid couch and a coffee table with a ring stain on it, and 2 bedrooms off a short hallway. Tucker and Leah took the bigger one. Mine had a window that faced the back of the property, and a bed with a green wool blanket folded at the foot of it. I dropped my bag and sat on the edge of the mattress for a second. It was fine. Everything was fine. We spent the rest of the afternoon doing basically nothing, which was the whole point. Tucker found a Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen cabinet and connected his phone to it. Leah unpacked carefully, everything in a specific place, which is just how she is. I walked the porch perimeter twice, looked at the yard, looked at the tree line. The woods started maybe 60 feet from the back of the cabin. Dense. The kind of dense where you lose sight of anything after about 15 feet in. By 5 o'clock, we were on the porch with beers. Tucker had an Oscar Blues pinner. Leah had a cider she'd brought from home, and I had whatever IPA I'd grabbed without looking at the label. We sat there while the sun dropped behind the ridge, and the light went from gold to flat to gone. The temperature dropped fast once it did. Tucker put on his fleece. Leah pulled her jacket tighter. Nobody moved inside. We talked about nothing important. Tucker's job, which he was ambivalent about. A friend from college who'd just gotten engaged. A trail we were planning to do the next day. The kind of conversation that doesn't go anywhere and doesn't need to. That was it. That was the whole evening. I ate half a bag of pretzels and felt genuinely relaxed for the first time in probably 2 months. I went to bed around 10:30. I don't know what time it was exactly when I woke up. My phone was face down on the nightstand and I didn't reach for it. I just lay there in the dark and listened. The sound was coming from the direction of the tree line. Low, rhythmic, not constant. It would go for a few seconds, stop, then start again. The best way I can describe it is something heavy being pulled across dry leaves. Deliberate, not frantic. It had a pace to it. I stayed completely still. I do that sometimes when something wakes me up. Just freeze and wait, like if I don't move. Whatever it is won't know I'm there. Probably not a useful instinct, but there it is. I told myself it was deer. Deer move through the underbrush at night. They're heavier than people think. They drag their legs through leaf litter. I know that's true because I've looked it up before after hearing things in the dark, which tells you something about me. The sound fit. Mostly. It stopped after a few minutes. I lay there a little longer, staring at the ceiling. The window was cracked and the air coming in was cold and smelled like wet bark. Then I turned over and went back to sleep. In the morning, I didn't mention it. Tucker made coffee on the 2-burner stove and Leah sat at the kitchen table with her phone. And I poured myself a mug and stood at the window and looked at the backyard. The tree line looked the same as it had the night before. Nothing disturbed as far as I could tell. I didn't go check. I thought about it for a second and then didn't. Tucker didn't bring it up. Leah didn't either. I figured if they'd heard something they would have said so. Or maybe they'd done the same thing I did. Talked themselves down and moved on. Either way, nobody said anything, so I didn't either. We just had coffee and figured out breakfast. Square Root in Brevard was Tucker's idea. It's on Main Street, the kind of place with exposed brick and a chalkboard menu. Plays a mix of Americana and stuff I didn't recognize. I got eggs and toast and a second coffee. Leah got a bowl of oatmeal with fruit and ate about half of it. Tucker got a full breakfast and ate all of it and talked about the trail the whole time. The Black Mountain Loop. About 6 miles, moderate elevation, good views from the upper section. I'd looked it up the night before. We'd done harder trails. It seemed like a solid Saturday. The drive back to the cabin and then out to the trailhead took maybe 20 minutes. The parking area was gravel, a few other cars already there. We started around 10:30. The first half was easy. Good trail, well marked. The kind of hiking where you can actually hold a conversation without watching your feet every second. We talked. Tucker set the pace, which was slightly faster than necessary, which is also just how he is. Leah walked behind him, and I walked behind her, and at some point I stopped talking and just listened to the woods for a while. Birds, wind in the upper canopy, our feet on the trail. The views from the top were good. We stopped and ate the sandwiches we'd packed, and Tucker took about 15 photos. I sat on a flat rock and looked out at the ridgeline and thought about nothing in particular. It was a good hour. The way back down was where it changed. We were maybe a mile from the trailhead when we came around a bend and walked into it. Both sides of the trail, for about 30 feet, someone had tied strips of cloth to the branches at eye level. Pale, off-white, some of them almost gray. Each one knotted, not loosely. Tight, deliberate knots, the kind you have to work at. They hung completely still because there was no wind in that section of trail, just hanging there, one after another, lining the path. We all stopped at the same time. Memorial, maybe, Tucker said. People do that, tie things to trees. Leah looked at the strips for a long moment. That's not what this looks like. Tucker shrugged. What does it look like? She didn't answer. She just started walking again through the middle of it, not touching anything. I followed her. The cloth strips were close enough that I could have reached out and touched them without extending my arm all the way. I didn't. We came out the other side and kept going. Tucker caught up and said something about the elevation gain on the way back, and I answered him. But the easy feeling from the morning didn't come back, not all the way. I kept walking. We got back to the cabin a little after 4. Tucker was talking about his boots, something about the insole rubbing wrong on the descent, and I was half listening. The porch steps were right there, and I was already thinking about sitting down and not moving for a while. Leah stopped first. She was 2 steps ahead of me, and she just stopped, looking down at the mat. It was one of those rubber grid mats, black, said welcome in raised letters that were already mostly worn down. And there was a piece of paper folded under the front edge of it. Not sticking out, obviously. Tucked in, like someone wanted it to stay but not be immediately visible. Tucker picked it up before either of us said anything. He unfolded it and looked at it for a second. Then he turned it so we could see. It was a grid, hand-drawn in pencil, maybe 8 columns across and 6 rows down. Each cell had a symbol in it. Not letters, not numbers, not anything I recognized. Some of them were geometric, little angular shapes. Some looked almost like letters, but weren't quite. One of them repeated a few times in different rows. The lines were careful. Whoever drew this took their time. "Huh," Tucker said. That was his whole reaction. "Huh." He took out his phone and photographed both sides. The back was blank. He refolded it and held it out to me, and I took it, not sure why. It was regular printer paper, the cheap kind, slightly soft from being outside. "Probably kids," Tucker said, "or like a geocache thing. People leave stuff." Leah hadn't said anything. She was looking at the paper in my hand with an expression I couldn't read exactly. Not scared. More like she was running something through her head and not liking where it landed. "You okay?" I asked her. "Yeah." She went inside. Tucker watched her go, then looked at me. "She's been quiet since the trail." "I know." He shrugged and followed her in. I stood there on the porch for another minute with the paper in my hand. I set it on the little table by the door, the one with the citronella candle on it that we'd never lit. I didn't throw it away. I don't know why I didn't throw it away. Tucker went to start dinner and Leah came back out. She didn't sit down. She stood near the railing with her arms crossed, not in an annoyed way, just like she was holding something in place. She looked at me and then looked out at the yard. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay." On the trail, there was someone in the trees. I waited. About 50 feet off the path, standing still. I noticed them when we were coming down through that long section before the switchbacks. She paused. I thought it was another hiker. Someone who'd gone off trail a little, taking a break, whatever. I didn't think much of it. But I looked back about a quarter mile later. She stopped. They hadn't moved at all. Same spot, same position, just standing there watching us. I didn't say anything for a second. The yard was getting dim, that early evening gray that comes fast in the mountains. "You didn't say anything on the trail," I said. "I know. I kept thinking I was wrong about the position, that I was misremembering where I'd seen them." She shook her head slightly. I wasn't. I believed her. That was the thing. Leah doesn't do drama. She's the kind of person who will sit with something uncomfortable for a long time before she says it out loud. And when she finally does, it's because she's already checked herself twice. She'd been a medical resident for 2 years. She had a pretty high bar for what counted as alarming. I went inside and found my phone and came back out. Looked up the Pisgah National Forest Ranger Station number. Got it on the 3rd search result. It rang 4 times and then someone picked up. "Pisgah National Forest, this is Ranger Wilkins." I explained it as plainly as I could. Renting a cabin off Route 276, hiked the Black Mountain Loop, saw a figure standing in the trees off trail, not moving, watching us. Also found a paper under our welcome mat with symbols on it we didn't recognize. There was a pause. Not a long one. "Appreciate you calling that in," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of calm that comes from saying reassuring things to worried people for a long time. "We haven't had any reported incidents in that area recently. Trail's been quiet." "Okay," I said. "Now I will mention, there's a small religious community that's been operating near the forest boundary. Been there about 4 years. Completely legal. They've got their permits in order. They do tend to leave markers on the trails sometimes. Cloth, sometimes other materials. It's their practice." "Cloth markers," I said. "That's right." "And the figure?" Another pause. Shorter. "Could be a member of that community." They do move through the area. They're not a danger to anyone. He said it the way you say something when you're technically not lying, but you're also not saying the whole thing. I've had professors talk like that. Lawyers on TV talk like that. There's a particular flatness to it. All right, I said. Thanks. You folks have a good evening. Call back if anything else comes up. He hung up first. I stood there with the phone in my hand. A religious community. Trail markers. I looked at the folded paper on the little table. Those weren't trail markers. And the figure Leah described wasn't someone on a walk. I went inside and didn't say much about the call. Tucker had pasta going, water boiling, and he'd opened a bottle of red that was already half gone by the time I sat down. Leah had changed into a sweatshirt. The inside of the cabin was warm and it smelled like garlic, and for a while it almost felt like a regular Saturday night. Tucker put on a playlist. We ate. We talked about a mutual friend from college who'd just gotten engaged to someone none of us had met. Tucker refilled my glass without asking. It was fine. It was almost fine. Around 10, the porch light started flickering. It did it twice, fast, then went steady, then flickered again. Tucker looked up at the ceiling like he could see through it to the fixture. Bulb's probably loose, he said, and pushed back from the table. He was outside for maybe 2 minutes. When he came back in, he didn't say anything right away. He stood in the doorway with his hand still on the frame, and his face was a color I hadn't seen on Tucker before. "Come look at this," he said. Quiet. We went out. The porch light was steady now. And on the boards directly beneath the fixture, centered under it like someone had measured, there were 12 stones arranged in a circle. Not gravel, not random rocks. Smooth, similar-sized stones, evenly spaced, forming a clean circle maybe 2 feet across. Somebody had placed them one by one while we were sitting 10 feet away eating pasta and talking about a wedding. Nobody said anything for a while. Tucker crouched down and looked at them without touching them. Leah stood with her arms at her sides. I looked at the circle, and then at the tree line, which was just dark shapes now, and I thought about the ranger's voice, that particular flatness, and I thought about the paper on the table inside. I didn't say what I was thinking. I already knew it wasn't random. We went back inside. Tucker closed the door behind us, and I watched him do it. The way he checked the latch twice without seeming to notice he was doing it. That was new. Leah was already at the table. She had the paper in front of her, the one with the symbols, and she was looking at it the way she looks at things when she's already made up her mind about something, and is just waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. I've known her long enough to recognize that. Tucker sat down across from her. I stayed standing near the counter. "I need to tell you something," she said. Tucker put his hands flat on the table. "Okay." She pointed to one of the symbols near the center of the grid. Not the bold one at the top, one of the smaller ones, kind of angular with a line cutting through the middle at a diagonal. "I've seen this before," she said. "Not something like it. This exact one." Tucker looked at it. "Where?" "A patient," she said. "Last spring, Mission Hospital. She works at Mission in Asheville. Has for about 2 years. I knew that. What I didn't know was whatever she was about to say next, because she paused for a second in a way that felt deliberate, like she was deciding how much to include. "He came in unresponsive," she said. "Brought in by ambulance, no ID on him, no family, nobody with him. He was physically okay mostly. Nothing acute we could find. But he wouldn't respond to anything. Not pain, not light, not voice. Just lay there with his eyes open." Tucker said, "Like a coma?" "No, he was tracking. His eyes moved. He was in there. He just wasn't talking." She paused again. "He never talked. Not once during his entire stay." That part landed a little weird. Not impossible, but weird. "How long was he there?" I asked. 4 days, she said. "We ran everything. Neuro consult, psych consult, tox panel. Nothing came back that explained it. He ate when food was in front of him. He walked when we helped him up. He just didn't speak, and he didn't respond to questions, and he didn't acknowledge that anyone else in the room existed. She looked at the paper again. And he had that symbol tattooed on the inside of his left wrist. Same proportions, same line through the middle. Nobody said anything for a second. When he was discharged, she said, he got up on his own, got dressed, walked to the door. A nurse tried to stop him to get a signature on the discharge paperwork. He walked past her. She said he didn't push her, didn't look at her, just went around her like she wasn't there. Leah folded her hands. They found a piece of paper on his pillow after he left, folded the same way as this one. She tapped the paper on the table. Tucker sat back. I could see him doing the thing where he tries to find the angle that makes it not mean what it obviously means. He's good at that, usually. He didn't say anything this time. "Did you keep it?" I asked. "The paper from the hospital." "No," she said. "I probably should have. I didn't." She looked at me. I tried to forget him, honestly. The whole thing. He bothered me in a way I couldn't explain, and I don't love things I can't explain, so she shrugged once, put it away. That's Leah. She doesn't scare easy, and when something does get to her, she files it somewhere and moves on. The fact that she was pulling this particular file out now, in front of us, at this table, with that paper between us and 12 stones sitting in a circle on the porch outside, that told me more than the story itself did. Tucker said it could be a coincidence. Leah looked at him. She didn't say anything. "I'm just saying," he said. "Symbols repeat. Religious iconography, folk traditions. There's overlap all the time. The ranger said there's a community out here. Some guy in Asheville has a tattoo. That's not necessarily." "Tucker," she said. Quiet. That was it. He stopped. We sat there for a while. I don't remember exactly what we talked about after that, if anything. At some point, Tucker turned the lights off except for the one over the sink, and we went to bed. I lay on top of the covers in my clothes and stared at the ceiling and listened to the cabin settle and the trees outside and nothing specific. Just everything. The whole property. Waiting for a sound I couldn't name. I didn't sleep. Sunday came in gray. I was already sitting on the edge of the bed when the light started coming through the curtain, which was thin and let in more than it should have. My eyes felt dry. I'd been awake long enough that I wasn't even tired anymore, just kind of hollow and running on whatever's underneath tired. Tucker tried to start the car at a little after 8. I heard it from inside. The engine turned over and cut out. He tried again. Same thing, and again. I came out and stood on the porch and watched him try it 4 more times. It would catch for maybe 2 seconds and then just stop. Clean, like something pulling a plug. "That's not a battery," I said. "I know," he said. He called a tow service out of Brevard. The woman on the phone said 2 hours minimum, maybe closer to 2.5. Tucker said fine and came back inside, and we made coffee and didn't talk about the car much. Leah sat at the table with her phone. I drank my coffee standing up. After a while, I went outside. I told myself I was just getting air. That was mostly true. But I'd been thinking since I woke up about the property, the edges of it, the parts we hadn't walked. The cabin sat in a clearing, and the yard ran back maybe 60 feet before the tree line started. We'd been on the porch, on the trail, in the car. We hadn't walked the perimeter. I went around the left side of the cabin first, past the propane tank and the wood pile that nobody had touched. The grass back there was longer, hadn't been cut recently, and it was wet from the night. My trail runners were soaked through in about 30 seconds. I kept going. The back edge of the yard was where the mowed part ended, and the ground cover started. That mix of fern and low brush before the trees. I walked along that line, heading right, hands in my pockets, not really looking for anything specific. I found it about 2/3 of the way across the back. A trench. Shallow, maybe 8 or 10 inches deep, roughly 40 feet long. running parallel to the tree line. The earth was dark and freshly turned, piled in a low ridge along one side. Not erosion, not animal activity. Somebody had dug this, recently. The soil was still loose, hadn't compacted or dried out at the edges yet. I stood there and looked at it. Then I smelled it. Not strong, not overwhelming, but it was there. Underneath the wet soil and the leaf smell, something else. I know what that smell is. Most people do, even if they've only encountered it once or twice. You don't forget it and you don't mistake it for something else. Something was in the ground. I stood there for probably a full minute, maybe longer. I looked at the trench and I looked at the tree line behind it, and I thought about the ranger's voice on the phone and the circle of stones and the man in the hospital who walked out without signing anything. Then I turned around and walked back to the cabin. Tucker was refilling his coffee when I came in. Leah was still at the table. Neither of them looked up. I didn't say anything. I sat down and picked up my own mug and looked out the window at the yard and waited for the tow truck. The truck showed up around 10:30. Tucker had called for an 11 o'clock window, so I noticed that first. Not a big deal probably, but I noticed it. It came up the gravel drive slow. A white flatbed with Stevens Towing stenciled on the door in faded blue letters. I was still at the table with my coffee when I heard the tires on the gravel, and I got up and looked out the window. The truck pulled to a stop about 20 feet from the front porch and just sat there for a second. Engine idling. Nobody got out. Tucker set down his mug. That's him. We went out onto the porch. The driver's window came down and a heavy-set guy leaned out. One thick forearm on the door. Gray-brown hair, broad red face, small dark eyes that moved across the property in a slow, deliberate way. He looked at the cabin, looked at the yard, looked at the tree line. Then he looked at us. "You called for the tow," he said. Not a question. "Yeah," Tucker said. "Car's over here." The guy didn't move. He looked at the property again, the same slow sweep, and then he looked back at us. "Car's gonna come to the shop," he said. "You're gonna ride with me." Tucker kind of laughed. "We can just follow you, it's fine. We've got—" "You're gonna ride with me," the guy said again. Same flat tone, same face. That was it. No explanation, no softening. Just the same sentence twice. I looked at Tucker. Tucker looked at me. The driver, Lloyd Stevens, according to the door, just waited. He had the energy of someone who had already decided how the next 10 minutes were going to go and wasn't particularly interested in discussing it. "Okay," I said. "Give us a few minutes to grab our stuff." Lloyd Stevens looked at me for a second. "Don't take long." We went back inside. Tucker immediately started in about his hiking pack, his camera bag, the cooler he'd brought from home. Leah was already moving, quiet and efficient, picking up her jacket and her phone from the table. I grabbed my keys and my wallet. That was basically it for me. I travel light. It's a thing. "I'm not leaving my camera gear in there," Tucker said. He was standing in the middle of the living room looking at his stuff like he was doing math. "It'll be fine," I said. "We're coming back for it." "Are we, though?" I didn't have a good answer for that. I started to say something anyway, something about how we'd call the rental company and figure it out, but Leah grabbed Tucker's arm, hard enough that he stopped mid-breath. She pointed at the tree line. I looked. The figure was there. Same distance as before, maybe 50 feet back from where the yard ended and the trees started. Same complete stillness, but not in the same spot. Yesterday it had been off to the left, closer to the corner of the property. Now it was centered, standing directly behind the cabin, directly in line with the back door. It had moved. Not a lot, but enough. Tucker didn't say anything about the camera gear after that. He picked up his jacket and his keys, and we walked out the front door and got into Lloyd Stevens' truck. Leah in the middle, Tucker by the window, me on the outside. The cab smelled like diesel and old coffee. There was a Wendy's bag on the floor that looked like it had been there a while. Lloyd Stevens didn't say anything when we got in. He put the truck in gear and started loading the car onto the flatbed. We sat there and watched him work through the windshield. He was efficient. Didn't look back at the cabin, didn't look at the tree line, just did the job. When the car was secured, he got back in, turned the truck around on the gravel and headed down the drive. I watched the cabin in the side mirror until the trees closed around the road and it disappeared. After a few minutes of nobody talking, I said, "How did you know the address?" Lloyd Stevens glanced at me. "What's that?" "The address." Tucker called the dispatch number and gave them the address. "But you showed up early, so I'm wondering how you already knew where to go." He was quiet for a second. The road was narrow and he was watching it. "Been called out to that cabin 3 times, he said. "Past 18 months. I waited. Different renters every time, he said. Same problem every time." Tucker said, "What problem?" Lloyd Stevens didn't answer that. He just kept driving. I looked at Tucker. Tucker looked at Leah. Leah was watching the road ahead and her face was completely calm, which I'd learned by then meant the opposite of calm. Nobody asked Lloyd Stevens anything else. He didn't volunteer anything else. We rode the rest of the way to Brevard with the windows up and the radio off and the Wendy's bag rustling around on the floor every time we hit a curve. The shop was on the south end of Brevard, a gray cinder block building with 2 bays and a gravel lot. Hernandez Auto, hand-painted on a board above the door. One other car in the lot, an old Subaru up on stands. Lloyd Stevens backed the flatbed in and started unloading. He didn't come inside with us. The mechanic was a wiry guy in a gray coverall. Name patch said Billy. He had short, dark hair with grease in it and a narrow face, and he looked at us the way people look at you when they want to make clear they're not interested in conversation. He took the keys from Tucker without a word and pulled the car into the bay. We stood around for about 20 minutes. There was a waiting area with 2 plastic chairs and a coffee maker that wasn't on. I looked at my phone. Tucker texted someone. Leah stood by the bay door and watched Billy Hernandez work. He popped the hood and leaned in. After maybe 2 minutes, he straightened up and waved me over. "Just me." I went. He pointed at something under the hood. A wire running from the battery area down toward the engine block. It was cut. Clean through. Both ends sitting about an inch apart. Not frayed, not corroded, not worn. Cut. Like with a knife or a pair of snips. The rubber sheathing had a clean edge on both sides. "Ground wire," he said. I looked at it. "Okay. Car won't run without it." "Right." I looked at him. "Who cuts a ground wire?" He didn't answer that. He went and got a replacement wire from somewhere in the back, came out and fixed it in about 15 minutes. Then he pulled the car out of the bay, left it running in the lot, and went inside to write up the ticket. $400. He handed me the slip without looking at me. I paid with my card. He ran it, handed back the receipt, and put the keys on the counter between us. That was it. No explanation. No, any idea how this happened, or you might want to talk to someone about this. He just put the keys on the counter and looked at the wall behind me. I picked up the keys. Tucker and Leah were already outside. I stood there for 1 more second. "Thanks," I said. Billy Hernandez nodded once and walked back into the bay. Tucker was already at the car when I came out of the shop. He was leaning against the passenger door with his arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular. Leah was standing a few feet away, her jacket zipped all the way up even though it wasn't that cold. "We good?" Tucker asked. "Yeah," I said. "Ground wire." "Huh." He pushed off the car. "Weird." I didn't say anything to that. I unlocked it, and we got in. The drive back to Asheville is about 40 minutes on 64. Mostly 2-lane highway through the mountains, some curves, a few small towns that go by fast. I've driven it before. It's a pretty drive normally. I kept it around 60 and didn't think too hard about the road. Tucker was in the passenger seat. He put on music about 10 minutes in, something low and forgettable, and looked out the window. I don't think he was seeing much. Leah was in the back. I noticed in the first 5 minutes that she wasn't looking forward. She was turned, not all the way, but enough, watching out the rear window. I could see her in the mirror. She wasn't doing it dramatically. She wasn't craning her neck or making it a whole thing. She was just sitting there at a slight angle, eyes on the road behind us, steady and quiet. I didn't say anything. I don't know what I would have said. Hey, see anything? Probably not that. She stayed like that for most of the drive. I kept checking the mirror, not because I thought there was something behind us, but because she was there and I couldn't stop noticing. The road was just road. A few other cars. A truck pulling a trailer with a tarp over it. Nothing. Around Rosman, Tucker said, "I'll call the rental company tomorrow." "Okay," I said. "I'm sure they have some kind of process for this. Probably happens more than you'd think." I didn't answer that either. I wasn't sure what process he meant. I wasn't sure what this was exactly, in a way that you could describe to a rental company. "We left most of our stuff," he said. "Yeah, my sleeping bag's in there. The good one." Leah didn't say anything. I watched the road. Tucker dropped it after that. He went back to looking out the window. The music was still going. Something with a guitar that never really went anywhere. I turned it down a little and he didn't complain. We got into Asheville around 4:30. The light was doing that thing it does in late afternoon in the mountains, where it goes kind of sideways and flat, and everything looks a little washed out. I took Merriman Avenue down toward their neighborhood. Tucker and Leah have a place off Kimberly, one of those old craftsman houses they've been renting for 2 years. Nice street. Big trees. I pulled up in front and Tucker opened the door before I fully stopped. He got out and stretched and looked at their house like he was confirming it was still there. Leah got out slower. She stood on the sidewalk and looked back down the street for a second. Just a second. Then she looked at me through the open door. "Thank you for driving," she said. "Sure." She held my eye for a moment. She looked like she was deciding whether to say something else. She didn't. She closed the door and walked toward the house. Tucker leaned back in through the passenger side. "I'll text you," he said. "We'll figure out the cabin stuff." "Sounds good. And hey," he paused. "It was still a good trip, mostly." I nodded. He closed the door and jogged up to catch Leah at the porch. She already had the keys out. I watched them go in. The door closed. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds. I don't know why. Then I pulled out and drove home. My apartment is on the north side of town, about 15 minutes from their place. I've got the second floor of a house on Chestnut, 1 bedroom, a kitchen that's too small, a window over the sink that looks out at the neighbor's fence. I've been there for 3 years. It's fine. I got home around 5. I put my bag down by the door and didn't unpack it. I got a glass of water and stood in the kitchen and drank it. The apartment was quiet, in the way it always is when I've been somewhere else for a few days, like it's slightly unfamiliar, like it's been doing its own thing while I was gone. I made eggs around 6, ate them standing up at the counter because I didn't feel like sitting at the table. Washed the pan, put it back. Tucker didn't text. I checked my phone around 7. Nothing. Checked it again around 8:30. Still nothing. That was fine. He was probably tired. He was probably dealing with Leah or the rental company thing or just decompressing. That was fine. I sat down at the kitchen table around 9 with my phone and a beer I didn't really want and tried to think about something else. Work stuff. There was a project I needed to get back to Monday morning. I thought about that for maybe 2 minutes before it slid away. I kept coming back to the trail. Not the figure. Not the stones on the porch. Not the trench. Not Lloyd Stevens sitting in his truck not getting out. I kept coming back to the cloth strips. the pale, knotted ones tied to the branches at eye level, running for that stretch of path on the way back down. Specifically, I kept trying to work out the order. Whether they had been there when we walked up in the morning, or whether they had shown up after we passed through and were only there on the way back down. I ran it back. We parked at the trailhead around 10. Walked up. The Black Mountain Loop goes up before it comes back, so we did the climb first. I was thinking about the sequence of it, what I saw when, and I was pretty sure I didn't notice the strips on the way up. Pretty sure. We would have said something. Tucker would have said something, or Leah would have, and nobody did. So they weren't there on the way up. Except then I ran it back again, and I wasn't sure. Because there's a section of the trail on the ascent where you're cutting across a south-facing slope and the trees thin out, and I was mostly watching my footing. Tucker was ahead of me. Leah was behind. I wasn't looking at the branches. I could have walked right past them, so maybe they were there. Maybe I just didn't see them. I ran it back a third time. Same result. Different result. I couldn't land it. That's not unusual. I know that. Memory doesn't work like video. You don't get a clean playback. Details drop out, especially when you're moving and not specifically paying attention to a thing. That's normal. But this didn't feel like a gap. That's the part I couldn't get past. A gap feels like missing footage, like the reel skips and you know it's skipped. This felt different. Every time I ran the sequence back, I got a complete version. It just wasn't the same version. Both of them felt equally real. The one where the strips were there on the way up, and the one where they weren't. Each time I checked, I got a full memory, just not a consistent one. I sat there at the kitchen table for a long time with that. The beer went warm. I didn't finish it. Outside, a car went by on Chestnut, and its headlights moved across the ceiling and disappeared. I kept running it back. I couldn't stop. Not because I thought it would matter, not because it changed anything about the rest of what happened that weekend. Just because I couldn't get it to sit still. The cloth strips and the branches and the light through the trees, and whether we'd already seen them or whether we were seeing them for the first time on the way down. I couldn't fix it in place. And the longer I sat with it, the less it felt like forgetting. I finally got up and put the beer in the sink. Didn't pour it out. Just set it there. I don't know why that felt like a decision, but it did. The kitchen was quiet. My apartment's on the third floor of a building on Chestnut, and it's usually pretty quiet after midnight. Just the occasional car. The refrigerator doing whatever refrigerators do at 2 in the morning. I stood at the counter for a minute and looked at the table like I was going to sit back down. Then I didn't. I went to the window instead. Nothing out there. A streetlight, a parked Subaru with a busted taillight, the laundromat across the street with its sign still on. Normal Sunday night. I stood there probably longer than made sense. The thing I kept coming back to wasn't the figure in the trees. It wasn't the trench. I'd spent most of the drive back from Brevard thinking about the trench, about that smell, about what you'd have to tell yourself to keep driving and not say anything to Tucker and Leah. I'd told myself a lot of things on that drive. Deer. Something that died naturally. A garden, maybe, though nobody gardens in a 40-foot line at the back of a rental property. I'd run through the options and none of them held, and eventually I just stopped running through them and focused on the road. But the trench wasn't what was keeping me up. I went back to the table and sat down again. Got out my phone and opened the photos Tucker had taken of the paper. The grid of symbols. He texted them to the group chat Friday night, back when it still felt like a weird thing that happened on a trip and not the kind of thing you'd be sitting alone with at 2 in the morning. I looked at them for a while. The symbols didn't mean anything to me. They still didn't. I put the phone face down, the cloth strips. That was it. That was the thing. I'd been trying to work it from every angle I could think of. I tried anchoring it to the light. I remembered the light being lower on the way down, more orange, hitting the trees at a different angle than when we'd gone up. That part I was sure of. So if I could place the cloth strips relative to the light, I'd have the sequence. But every time I tried to do that, both versions worked. Strips in the orange light on the way down, strips in the flat afternoon light on the way up. Both of them sat there and looked equally true. I tried the order we were walking. Tucker was usually out front on the trail because he sets a pace and doesn't really notice when the rest of us fall behind. Leah was in the middle. I was last. That part was consistent. So I tried to remember what I was looking at when I first noticed the strips. Whether I was looking past Leah at something Tucker had already passed, or whether I was the first one to see them. That should have been a fixed point. I was last in line. If the strips were there on the way up, Tucker would have walked through them first. I tried to remember if I'd seen him react. I couldn't get it. I had a version where he stopped and said something, and a version where nobody said anything until Leah pointed, and a version where I was the one who said something first. 3 different versions, all of them complete. None of them obviously wrong. I tried to remember what we were talking about. We've been talking most of the hike, just regular stuff, the kind of conversation you have when you haven't seen people in a while and you're catching up. I remembered a stretch where Tucker was talking about his job, something about a project that got pushed back. I remembered Leah laughing at something. I couldn't place either of those relative to the cloth strips. Could have been before, could have been after. I got up and got a glass of water, drank half of it standing at the sink. Now, the thing about normal forgetting is you know when it's happening. There's a gap. You were somewhere and then you weren't, and you know the middle part is gone. I've forgotten plenty of things. I'm not someone who thinks he has a great memory. I forget where I put my keys probably 4 times a week. I forget names. I forgot the entire second half of a road trip I took sophomore year because I was sick the whole time and everything blurred together. This wasn't that. This was the opposite of that. This was too much memory, not too little. Every time I reached for the sequence, I got a full version back. The problem wasn't the gap. The problem was there were 2 complete things sitting in the same slot, and I couldn't make one of them leave. I sat back down. The refrigerator kicked on and hummed for a while and then stopped. I thought about Leah watching the road through the back window the whole drive home. I thought about Tucker saying he'd text later and then not texting. I thought about Lloyd Stevens sitting up in the cab of that truck with his hands on the wheel and the engine running, not getting out. Not even opening the door, just looking at the property with those small, dark eyes like he'd already decided what kind of place it was, and didn't need to look any longer than necessary to confirm it. 3 times in 18 months, different renters, same problem every time. I thought about what that meant. I thought about it for a while, and then I stopped thinking about it because there wasn't anywhere useful to go with it. Some things you can turn over and eventually get to the bottom of. Some things you just hold, and they stay the same shape no matter how long you hold them. My phone was still face down on the table. I flipped it over. No texts. Tucker's last message in the group chat was from Saturday afternoon, a photo of his hiking boots on the trail with some dumb caption. Leah had reacted to it with a thumbs up. That was the last thing in the thread. I put the phone down again. The cloth strips and the branches in that stretch of trail. 30 feet of them, pale, knotted, at eye level, running along both sides of the path. Whoever put them there knew the trail, knew where people would be walking, knew the height to hang them so they'd be impossible to miss. That part wasn't in question. The part in question was whether they were there when we walked through the first time, or whether someone put them there while we were further up the trail and we found them on the way back. And I couldn't answer it. I'd been sitting in my kitchen for 3 hours trying to answer it, and I couldn't. The thing that got me, the thing I kept landing on no matter how many times I ran it back, was that it didn't feel random. Normal forgetting feels random. You lose things in no particular order for no particular reason. This felt specific. This one thing, this one sequence, this one detail that would have told me something about how much time we'd been watched and from how close. That was the thing I couldn't hold still. Not the figure. not the stones, not the symbol Leah recognized from a man who walked out of a hospital without signing anything. The cloth strips. The order. Just that. I sat there until the sky outside started going gray at the edges. Not light yet, just less dark. I watched it happen through the window without really deciding to watch it. At some point, I put my head down on my arms on the table and closed my eyes. I didn't sleep. I just stopped trying to figure it out. That was the best I could do. I stayed there with my eyes closed and the kitchen getting slowly lighter around me. And I let the weekend sit where it was, behind me and unresolved, all of it. The sounds and the symbols and the smell from the trench and the man in the trees who didn't move. I let it be the shape it was. The cloth strips, though, those I couldn't put down, not entirely. They're still there when I think about it, which I still do sometimes, late at night when the apartment's quiet and I can't sleep. Both versions, both of them complete, both of them equally real. I still can't tell you which one happened,